Hey friends, Elizabeth here, and I'm back with the second video in my Read It or Unhaul It challenge. Make sure to watch the first reading vlog if you missed it. The link will be in the description box down below, and also consider following me on Instagram and or TikTok to follow along week by week as I spin a wheel to decide which of the almost 200 books on my physical TBR I'm gonna read next. And every week I either finish it, or if I DNF it, I have to unhaul it. No excuses, with the exception of my self-compassion clause, 5 passes. If I need to read a book at another time or I need more time to finish the book, I can use one of my passes because I'm trying to be realistic and also kind to myself. But without further ado, I'm really excited to see what the wheel has in store for me next, so let's spin it. This video is kindly sponsored by Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one website platform that I have personally been using for my own websites for many years at this point and highly recommend. I'll talk about them a little bit more later in this video, but for now, let's get back into it. All right, I have my wheel, let's go. I shortened the spinning time because it was really long. The anticipation was killing me. What is this? The Marrow Thieves. Oh, the Marrow Thieves. Oh, this is a more recent addition to my collection. Okay, I know where this is. Okay, so the wheel landed on the Marrow Thieves, so I'm gonna remove it from my wheel so I don't land on it again in future. And here is the Marrow Thieves by Cherie Dimaline. And as you can see, it's won many awards. This is a much loved Canadian book. It's actually taught in schools now. It wasn't when I was in school because I'm old, but it is now. And my sister read this last year and told me I really needed to read it. And it had already been, you know, on my radar. I already meant to read it at some point. I was familiar with it, but I managed to grab a copy at a used bookstore in Saskatoon. So I'm really looking forward to reading this. I'm glad the wheel landed on this one. I've been meaning to read it for ages. It's also a much more doable length for this challenge, considering I also read lots of other stuff, you know, concurrently to this challenge. This is 234 pages, so a lot more doable. And I really love the description of this. It sounds fantastic. Here's what it says on the back. In a world nearly destroyed by global warming, the indigenous people of North America are being hunted for their bone marrow, which carries the key to recovering something the rest of the population has lost: the ability to dream. Sounds right up my alley. I'm so excited to read this. So I'm gonna go off and get started. When I get to around 115 pages in, I'll come back and give you a mid-book update, and then I'll come back at the end and let you know my final thoughts. But I'm excited. This is gonna be good. See you soon. So I'm halfway through The Marrow Thieves and I'm really enjoying this so far. This is a pretty fast-paced and short novel overall, so I feel like there's not a huge amount I can say about the first half. I feel like, especially the way the last chapter I read finished, we're about to get into sort of the next stage of the novel, and it seems like the stakes are about to be raised even higher from where they already are, and they're already pretty high. But I'm really liking this so far. I already knew that I liked this author's writing style from Empire of Wild, and I still like it. It's largely pretty straightforward. It's not overly flowery or anything, but it has some really beautiful, leaning on lyrical descriptions of the landscape, of animals, of relationships. There are just moments here and there that I really have to pause and kind of revel in it for a second. And I've definitely been highlighting a lot of quotes. So it definitely feels like it's aimed at younger readers and probably the younger end of YA, which makes sense. I think it is, written for those younger sort of preteen ages. But what I like about it is that while it does feel like it's written for that age range, it doesn't feel like it's pandering. It doesn't feel like it doesn't think that 12 or 13-year-olds can read this kind of a story and understand what it's trying to say, what the themes are, what the messaging is, understand the implications of what's happening. So I really appreciate that, because I think that's what I tend to struggle with. And what I mean when I say that a book feels very YA, there's either, a very particular writing style of more modern YA that is not my cup of tea, but also that pandering, that sort of dumbing things down. And I don't think that kids and teens need stories to be dumbed down. I think they're smart, they're perceptive, and it's worth allowing them to be challenged. Not that this is, so cerebral and so complex that, it's going to go over the head of your average 12 or 13-year-old, but I just feel like it's a nice balance. I feel like it respects the intelligence and the intellectual curiosity of the kids who would be reading this, which is probably one of the reasons why it's being taught in schools. It feels like a great way to start conversations about so many different topics: residential schools, the treatment of Indigenous people in Canada, racism in a more broad sense, also climate change, destruction of our environment, the kinds of adaptations and changes that might happen in reaction to a planet that is increasingly unstable due to climate change. There's also an interesting theme emerging about what makes us human and what differentiates good people from bad, or people who are able to stay true to their values and stay a good person through really difficult times, versus those who sort of give in to their basest instincts or do really horrible things to other people. What differentiates those two groups? And again, I just think those are all things that are worth talking about with kids, and I could see why this would be a really great vehicle to have those conversations. But just in general, I'm really enjoying this. It has an engaging and quickly paced plot. The characters are great. There's a found family dynamic that is really heartwarming, despite the very upsetting, heartbreaking backstories of most of these characters and the predicament that they're in being really difficult. The characters themselves and their connection to each other is really sweet and hopeful. Set in a near future, the world building is great to make it feel like our world, but slightly shifted. I'm really enjoying this so far. As hard as it is to read some of these passages, some of the backstory coming to chapters, well, all of them have been really hard to read. I think what makes them hardest is that they're not unrealistic. They're not amplified for effect. All the horrors that are happening in these characters' lives are things that humans do to each other on a regular basis, and would probably be even more likely to do in difficult circumstances, as depressing as it is. So very realistic, but definitely harrowing. I'm excited to go finish it. Only another 120-ish, 110-ish pages to go. I will possibly finish this tonight and come back later to share my final thoughts and spin the wheel for my next pick. We shall see. But at least so far, highly recommend. Hello friends, I have finished The Marrow Thieves and I loved this so much. This book was incredible. My sister was right when she recommended it to me. It was beautiful, it was heartfelt, it was emotional, it was so immersive and intense and really an emotional roller coaster, but also hopeful and cozy. The found family was just perfection. It had a more simple, straightforward writing style for the most part, which makes sense seeing as it's aimed at a younger age group. But despite being written for a younger audience with a younger protagonist and having more straightforward language, it was still beautifully written. There were so many gorgeous moments in the prose that were both infused with emotion, but also just beautifully described, even in their simplicity, and lots of really evocative, gorgeous descriptions of the wilderness in Ontario, which that always gets to me. I love reading from Canadian authors, especially Canadian authors who are as in love with Canada's landscape as I am, and you can just tell in their writing how much they love it by the way they describe it. L.M. Montgomery is a popular one for this, especially I think of The Blue Castle, which I have on my shelf, is probably the best example, but also the Anne of Green Gables series, and from my understanding, her other books, which I haven't gotten around to yet. Moon of the Crusted Snow and Moon of the Turning Leaves duology, that one is so great in its description of, especially, again, Ontario and Ontario's natural state when it's not being interfered with by people. And anyway, I'm going on a tangent, but I just love it so much. And I feel like Cherie Dimaline did such a beautiful job of that in this book. I have been doing little photo shoots for each of the books for this challenge as I finish them so that I can kind of document them and share them on my Instagram and take a picture of some of my favorite annotations, quotes throughout. And this one I knew I had to take the photos in a forest, so I actually brought it with me to go to my parents' house in Ontario this month, and I took the photos in the forest that is just across the street from their house. And I sacrificed myself for it because I got approximately 82 mosquito bites in the 20 minutes, if that I was in the forest. And I wasn't even that deep into the forest, but it was worth it. I got some beautiful photos. I think I've already mentioned, but this book is taught in Canadian schools. Not all of them, it depends on the school board and the teacher, but it is a common choice for schools. And I just think it's a perfect choice for so many reasons. Even as an adult in my 30s, reading this was so pulled in and emotionally invested. But I imagine if I'd read this when I was 12, 13, 14, I would have just been obsessed with this story, with these characters. They are so vivid. The relationships between them all have so many layers of complexity and feel very real, have all of those nuances and facets that real life relationships have, especially with this sort of ragtag group of people who have just kind of found each other and built this family and are trying to survive under really difficult conditions. They have developed lifelong bonds and they're really beautiful to be, a third party witness to. My absolute favorite relationship in this was sort of a quasi sibling relationship that developed between our protagonist and a young girl who was like his little sister, and I just love them so much. That's probably the most emotional I got reading this book, as well as a couple things that happened near the end, which I'll talk about in the spoiler section. This book did make me cry several times, and considering how short it is, that is saying something. I mean, I cry relatively easily in general, and I'm crying a lot more recently because I'm, emotionally raw from grieving. But this book really got me, and I cried at least 7 or 8 times, I would say. But like I said, not only do I think this would be great in schools because I think kids reading it, teens reading it would become so invested and be interested in the story because those characters are so vivid, but also it does such a great job of examining the themes and opening the floor for discussion in a school setting with a teacher about residential schools and treatment of Indigenous people, medical experimentation, and, false imprisonment, and just the objectification and the sort of stripping away of rights, bodily autonomy from marginalized groups, and in this case specifically Indigenous people who have had their rights taken away, have been kidnapped, have been systemically and on an individual level abused through systems like residential schools. And this is fictional. It's a near future dystopian story, but I think that actually works better for young people to not feel like they're reading historical fiction that feels so hugely removed from their day-to-day life and experience. This feels much more current. It's set basically now or maybe 5 years out. I just think that maybe makes it more accessible simple and immediate for young people. And again, I just think that this is a great choice. I hope it continues to be taught in schools. I'll try not to get into it now because I maybe should make a separate video, but there has recently been news about Alberta schools, where I live now, banning a bunch of books that I read in school and found incredibly eye-opening and instrumental in my development as a human being and my understanding of the world. Books like The Handmaid's Tale, 1984, Brave New World, among many others. And I just hope that this isn't on the chopping block as well in Alberta or anywhere else in Canada. It's really frustrating to watch things go backwards, seemingly. I've only been around for a little over 3 decades, and I feel like things have just regressed so much in the last 15 years or so since I graduated high school. So anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Let me know if you would want me to make a video on book banning and sort of specifically how book bannings in the US are influencing a similar trend in Canada, because it's very concerning to watch. But anyway, back to this book. This really is a book that is examining the dehumanization of Indigenous people and the stripping of their rights, of their bodily autonomy, of their sovereignty. And that's just a trend of a colonial mindset in Canada, and it's something that has happened in the past. And I think those are the things that Cherie Dimaline was trying to explore with this book, and it just was so fantastically done. Like I said, it's very immediate, it's very engaging. It doesn't feel really quick or driving necessarily, but it just has a consistent rhythm to it. It keeps pushing forward. There's never really any long lulls where you could get bored. There are quiet moments, which I thought were done really beautifully and allowed you to connect deeper to the characters, which I think just made the book even better. But none of them felt like they were stopping the flow in its tracks, if that makes sense. It's intense, it has really high stakes, it's exciting, it's harrowing, it's terrifying, it's just everything. I loved it so much. I was so invested. If you can't tell, this is a 5-star read for me. I would highly recommend it, especially to any Canadians watching this. It's just very relevant to us specifically, but honestly, I think people from all over the world, again, I feel like I'm a broken record when it comes to Canadian lit, but I just keep trying to encourage people to check it out. I think Canadian lit is very underrated, and especially Canadian lit from Indigenous authors. Some of my favorite Canadian authors of all time that I've ever read have been Indigenous authors, and Cherie Dimaline is 2 for 2 right now with her books. I cannot wait to read more of her work, and I highly recommend it. Please read The Marrow Thieves, and if you have kids, if you have teenage kids, encourage them to read this as well. Maybe read it along with them, or each read it separately, but then discuss it with them. I just think this book does such a great job of bringing this very complicated, difficult, upsetting concept, time in history, to the forefront and making it accessible for young people in a way that you can feel the weight of it, the seriousness of it, the pain and suffering that is associated with things like residential schools and this kind of really insidious systemic racism, but without it going over their heads if they are 12, 13. This is really a story of contrasts. It is the duality of man and of life, in that it is devastating and harrowing and disturbing at times and deeply upsetting and sorrowful, but it's also hopeful and heartwarming and charming and sweet, and it's just everything. I love it so much. I could go on forever. Anyway, I love this. Please read it. I'm going to do a short spoiler section just to touch on some of the moments that hit me the hardest emotionally that are spoilers if you're going to read this. And like I said, you should 100% read this, so do not watch the spoilers. If you haven't read it yet, go read it and then come back. Okay, spoilers for The Marrow Thieves starting now. Oh my God. Okay, I'm gonna really try not to let myself remember these moments too vividly, because if I do, I will start to cry. I may have cried several times today already for unrelated reasons, so I'm just trying to hold it in, okay? But believe me when I say these moments had me sobbing. First of all, the sibling relationship that I talked about, that sort of pseudo-sibling relationship between our protagonist and this young girl he meets as part of this traveling group of people who are trying to survive and escape capture. She was the cutest little girl. I loved her so much, and their relationship was so sweet. And she dies in a shocking, sudden, incredibly upsetting way, even though it's off page. I just couldn't believe that it happened, and I was devastated. And I think the book does a great job of examining how our protagonist is dealing with that grief and how life-changing it is, how altering it is for him. But we feel it so much as readers as well, so that moment just completely broke me. Weg's backstory, her chapter where she talked about what happened to her before she found the group, was devastating on such a deep level. Her story has many layers, but the most vividly upsetting portion has to do with repeated sexual assault, and it was just so heartbreaking to read. We also have a moment where the matriarch of the group, sort of their grandmother figure, sacrifices herself for everyone. That had me sobbing in a heap on the floor. And then we have a moment which was even more close to home for me this summer, having just lost my dad. Our protagonist, French, has lost his parents and his brother and has now found this new family, but he doesn't know what's happened to his original family. And they happen to run into another group of people, and his dad is there. And their reuniting had me completely broken emotionally. There's multiple interactions between them with just little snippets, little details about things of like the way they look at each other, or the way his dad kisses him on the forehead and how that made him feel like a little kid again. I said I wasn't gonna cry. Oh my God. Really beautiful, very emotional for me, for him to think his father was gone and then to get to see him again and to properly say goodbye, and him leaving, and this time choosing to leave on his own terms and feeling ready to leave, as if he was able to sort of absorb all of his father's love, and that made him feel safe and strong enough to sort of leave the nest and be there for his new found family in a way that they need him, and sort of become an adult. Just, yeah. It really got to me. Clearly, anyways. This book made me cry so many times. I just loved all the characters so much. And I think French is a really realistic sort of teenage boy. And he can be a little irritating at times, especially the posturing when the girl he has a crush on starts, entertaining another teenage boy. And he starts just, puffing out his chest and trying to be the more manly of the two and getting a little stroppy when she talks to this other guy. And, it was a bit eye roll inducing, but also he's a teenage boy. It's very realistic. Okay, it's fine. And I just loved him. I was very attached to him. I think he was a very complex character and a really lovely character to follow, with a lot of integrity and kindness and compassion, and yet this sort of complexity, because he is living in a time where he has to be more grown up than he actually is, but also maybe ruthless at times, just to survive. Oh, also, I totally forgot the very last moment, which totally destroyed me, when we learn about Meeg's backstory. Broke me that he and his partner were broken up, that his partner was taken away, and he thought that he died. The whole scene of him capturing a truck, leaving a residential school, and finding all the vials of Marrow, and finding one that he thought was his partner Isaac, and keeping it with him always as sort of the only thing he had left of him, because he wasn't able to get back and save him in time. And then bringing all the vials to a lake and trying to put them to rest and give them their last rites and try to respect all these people whose lives were taken. That whole section had me sobbing. And then at the very end, Isaac and Meeg are reunited, which I never would have expected. And I appreciated it so much because it was a really hard book to read, and we did lose quite a few characters, and there was a lot of sadness and despair for obvious reasons because of the premise. But the fact that they were able to reunite and be together again and maybe build some kind of a future, and that Isaac wasn't gone, just was so beautiful and had me crying from joy. And I was very grateful for that hopeful, happy ending. And it was so good. I'm a mess. I have to stop talking about it because I feel myself, I keep starting to cry and then trying to reel it back. If I keep talking about it, I will just start crying on camera. I really try not to do that when possible. So anyway, also the moment where they find the 4 seasons and are able to sleep in beds and in their own rooms with closed doors for the first time in a very long time. And then they're all uncomfortable and feel strange sleeping in separate rooms and not being all together like they normally are. And so they just keep piling in the room and piling in the bed. And then when French fully wakes up in the morning, he finds every single one of their group stuffed in his room, and people are sleeping in chairs chairs and sleeping leaning against the wall and sleeping on the floor and like piled on top of each other in the bed. And it was just such a beautiful moment, such a lovely indication of how close they all became and how much strength and comfort they draw from each other. And that also made me tear up from joy and wholesomeness that time instead of sadness. This is just a really good book, okay? I really, really, really liked it. Please read it. Okay, I need to stop talking about spoilers. I'm gonna get so emotional. I just need to end it here. But those are my thoughts on The Marrow Thieves. I just love this so much. Please read it. Please, please do. It is not very long. It will take you so little time to read it. So just do it. Loved it. 5 stars. I'm so glad that the wheel landed on it. I'm so glad my sister recommended it to me and I found a copy in Saskatoon because this is definitely a new favorite. Definitely going near the top of my pile of favorite Canadian lit. I've found a couple new favorites of Canadian lit recently and I'm loving that. So The Marrow Thieves by Cherie, Dimaline. Damn, so good. Okay, without further ado, let's spin this wheel. Lest Darkness Fall. Lest Darkness Fall. I think this might be an obscure sci-fi book that is out of print that I saw recommended in a weird tiny Reddit thread and found on Etsy. Is that right? Let me look for this. Hello friends, I'm back and I have finished Lest Darkness Fall, but I wanted to let you know right off the bat, this is going to be the last book included in this video because it's the last book that I'm going to be able to fit in for this challenge for August because it took me 2 extra weeks to read this than initially planned. Yes, despite it being by far the shortest book selected for this challenge so far, there are reasons. We'll get into it. I'll explain it all. But I just wanted to let you know right off the bat that I'm not going to be reading more books for this particular vlog and hopefully crossing fingers and toes. And in September, I will have fewer life-altering huge events getting in the way and I'll be able to read or DNF and unhaul a book per week as initially intended. So I will get into all of that. I'll explain that as well as giving you my full review on this out-of-print sci-fi novella. But before we get into all of that, I wanted to take a minute to talk about this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one website platform that I have been using for, I kid you not, I just did the math, literally a decade. I started the Plant-Based Bride website that I still use today back in 2015. That's a little mind-boggling. My husband and I created our wedding website with Squarespace. I created my professional acting portfolio website with Squarespace when I was still working as a professional actor in musical theater. I have helped my friends and family make Squarespace websites, and over the last decade, I have come to know very intimately all of the many features that Squarespace has to offer and how incredibly easy to use it is while still providing such a professional and aesthetic result, which is something that I deeply appreciate as someone who has no coding experience and not a lot of free time, but still wants to have a professional landing place on the internet for whatever I am pursuing in my life at that particular point in time. Squarespace has always made it easy to build your website by relying on their professionally designed templates, of which they have many, which are suited to so many different types of websites and styles and aesthetics. But of course, whichever template you choose, they are completely customizable for your own needs and preferences. But even more exciting than their templates, which I have been a fan of for the last decade, is their brand new design intelligence, which combines 2 decades of industry-leading experience with cutting-edge AI technology to build a beautiful website perfectly tailored to your needs from scratch very quickly and easily. Squarespace is constantly improving their design tools to make them easier to use. I'm especially loving their newest update for editing your website. The drag and drop technology is chef's kiss, so easy to use, yet also as specific and detailed as you need it to be. They also have so many design options built right in that you can use to create exactly the look you're going for and get quite detailed with it if that's your thing. Squarespace also makes it incredibly simple to get paid for your work. Whether you have an online store for physical or digital products, or maybe you're a service-based business, Squarespace easily handles all the different moving parts of taking payments to make sure that the process is as easy and seamless as possible, both for you and for your customers. Squarespace is constantly adding new features that are incredibly useful, like generating invoices, creating shipping labels, managing email campaigns, and tracking your sales and analytics on the back end. I am constantly recommending Squarespace to my friends and family in real life. If you need a website, Squarespace is the place to go. Head to squarespace.com for your free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/plantbasedbride and use code plantbasedbride for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. You can also use this QR code. Thank you again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Okay, so let me explain first what happened. I will try to be as brief as possible. Basically, when the wheel landed on Lest Darkness Fall, I thought, wow, this is gonna take me 5 seconds to read. This is gonna be a breeze, and it's great timing because I have a lot going on this week. Before the end of the week, I'm gonna be flying out to go to a different province so that I can attend the equivalent of my father's funeral, his celebration of life. And that's gonna be really stressful. So I'm glad that I got a short book. I'll be able to finish it by the beginning of the week in just a couple days, film everything early, and have even a few extra days for whatever the next book is, if I need it. Little did I know that I would start this book on the weekend, feel very ahead on everything, getting about halfway through in a couple days, only for the basement where I'm sitting right now, where my home office is and all my equipment is, also the main storage area of our house, that basement, it was flooding. Yeah, it was flooding. So that was fantastic. Honestly, I've never had something like this happen to me. To be fair, this is the first home I have ever owned. Honestly, it was absolutely terrible, very scary, very overwhelming. I'm putting this down. I'm not even talking about this right now. My husband was away for work, so I was here by myself with the cats, and I was stressed, okay? I don't know in the grand scheme of things how bad it was. I mean, it could have been way worse. Luckily, none of my equipment was ruined. It didn't really get into my office, thank goodness. It was mostly in our utility room and crawl space where all our storage is, which was also stressful. I had to wade through inches of water to save my wedding dress, for example, which was not what I had been planning on doing on my Sunday evening. So anyway, one emergency plumber, and hundreds of dollars later, the problem was at least temporarily fixed in that the water was no longer rising rapidly and drained eventually. But then what followed was close to 48 hours of very little sleep and a lot of stress as I tried to assess the damage, rescue more things, tidy up, clear debris, throw things away, then do an extensive amount of cleaning and disinfecting of the basement, the hallway, the utility room, but also a whole flight of stairs, and then give both my cats a bath, which they do not enjoy for obvious reasons because they're cats. Because they, of course, got into the flooding water before I even realized what was happening. So yeah, it was a lot. And to be honest, it's not even done. There's still more. There's still more stuff to figure out. Things are not permanently fixed as far as I understand. Also, I did not have time or the brain power and emotional bandwidth to finish going through everything that we have stored in there. So I don't even want to think about how many more things that I have not looked at yet that might be ruined and having to be thrown away. I said I was going to try to be concise or brief or whatever, and this is not that. But anyway, that happened. That was very stressful. So I basically had one day on Wednesday to rush and get as much done as I possibly could work-wise, and sitting down to read, even if it was only 50 pages or something, was just not something that I had the time to do, literally, but also the brain power. I was completely overwhelmed and exhausted to be honest. So that went out the window, and I thought, well, I have a bus ride and a red-eye flight, so I can read it then. That's fine. And then I'll find time to film it once I'm in Ontario with my family. What could go wrong? Long story short, it didn't happen. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't finish the book. I had no interest in reading. I also just didn't want to be on camera. I didn't want to film myself, and I really didn't have the opportunity to do so anyway. So with all of that, the 1 week I had to read this book was gone. And I thought to myself, fine, I'll use one of my passes. A lot of stuff happened this week. I think I'm allowed. And the passes are there because life happens, and life certainly happened to me that week. So I thought, okay, I'm away for another week, but I can probably find time to finish the book at some point and film. But honestly, I just couldn't read for the next week and a half, basically. And it did cross my mind that maybe this was a time to DNF. Maybe I should just DNF it and move on to whatever the next book was. But I knew myself and knew that I wouldn't be in the place to read whatever the next book was anyway. And I did still want to finish it. I was enjoying it. I was intrigued by it. I wanted to finish the book. So I thought to myself, once again, I'll use another pass. As much as it sucks to use 2 in a row, again, it's a self-compassion clause. I need compassion right now. It's a hard time. One hopes that your basement floods very few times in your life, but one certainly hopes that you only lose your father once and that you only have to emotionally deal with the celebration of life or funeral and the aftermath of that with your family once, right? So again, I don't know why I feel like I have to justify it. I know I don't, because I built it in for that reason. I decided to use a second pass and thought when I get home, which I did midweek this week, I would finish it once I'm back in my home space and I have a second to breathe. Nothing like this will happen again for the rest of the year. No more floods ever. Honestly, that's what I would prefer. I think I'm fine with having 3 passes left for 4 months. I think that's doable. I think that still gives me that little bit of cushioning, that little bit of leeway, which is what the passes were meant to be for. I have no issue with using 2 passes, using them as intended. But because so many people DM'd me telling me that it wasn't fair or that I shouldn't have to use either both passes or any passes for the last couple weeks, I thought I'd bring it up here. You can let me know in the comments what you think. But, either way, I'm fine with using them. I'm also fine to not use them if the overwhelming consensus is that I shouldn't. It is neither here nor there, but that is what happened. And it's been honestly pretty terrible. But anyway, I'm getting severely sidetracked now. That's what happened. That's why it took me 2 extra weeks. That is why I am intending to use 2 passes, but let me know what you think. And now, after all of that rambling, which future me will cut into something much shorter, I imagine, because I feel like I just shared so much that was not relevant. Let's talk about Lest Darkness Fall, because this is a weird little book. Okay. I guess I'm trying to think. It's hard to talk about because unlike most of the books that I review on my channel, this is out of print. It does seem, from my experience finding it, that there are some copies floating around. It is possible to get it and read it, as I did, but it's not widely available. So I don't know how many of you would even attempt to get a copy and read this, which makes it kind of weird for me to review it, I guess, in the way that I typically do, which is trying to share enough of my thoughts so that you know whether it's something you're going to be interested in. Whether I like it or not, my hope is to share enough details that you can kind of figure out for yourself if it might work for you. In this case, I'm not sure how many of you would go out of your way to try to find it anyway, but I'll review it nonetheless. So basically, the premise here is our protagonist, Padway, is an archaeologist, and he is in Rome doing archaeology things. And his companion on the dig that he has met while in Rome mentions something about, there's some, spots in the world that are a little thinner, and there are myths, there are stories of people disappearing through them, and the theory is that they have gone back in time. And Rome is one of those areas that is sort of a hot spot for these kinds of timey-wimey events. And Padway mentioned something along the lines of, well, if someone was sent back in time, wouldn't they change the timeline and then everything for us would change? And his companion says, whoa, no, wait now. No need to worry. There's also a concept of multiple layered dimensions. And if you're sent back in time, you create a brand new dimension. So yeah, you might change all of history, but you're just changing it for this little pocket dimension, not for the main timeline or any of the other timelines. So don't worry about, altering history to the point where your own grandparents don't exist. And so you're never born, etc., etc. You're in your own little pocket dimension to do with as you please. And then, shockingly, Padway is sent back in time to ancient Rome, and we proceed from there. And there are a couple things that, where do I start? This was really fun, and I think it was meant to be fun. It's a short book. It's a novella. It's meant to be sort of a pulpy, entertaining, humorous, kind of silly sci-fi time travel story that you read like you're reading an episode of a TV show. It's that kind of vibe, especially something like the original series of Star Trek. You have a charming everyman protagonist, and he's thrown into this different version of the world back in time, and he's a fish out of water, and he has to make it work. And hijinks and silliness ensue because he's a modern man in an ancient time. And it was fun, and there were funny moments, and I enjoyed the general tone. I liked the writing style well enough. I was having a good time with it. I didn't love Martin Padway, our protagonist, necessarily. He's not gonna make any list of my top favorite protagonists anytime soon, but he was fine, you know? He wasn't horrible by any means. Honestly, what he reminded me of most was Andy Weir's protagonists, an everyman Gary Stu, who is really, really, really good at everything, even things that are outside of his area of expertise, to kind of a silly degree that's hard to suspend your disbelief for, but it almost reads a little bit like a power fantasy, but not even a power fantasy, more like a competence fantasy or like a genius fantasy, where you as the reader can self-insert into this very average, very everyman, regular dude who just happens to know how to build all kinds of advanced technology for the time in the 1940s where he's from, that he can remember off the top of his head with no reference materials, so he can recreate them in ancient times and be hailed as a genius. He also remembers lots of specifics of history, which makes more sense if he's an archaeologist, especially focusing on ancient Rome. But his knowledge of engineering and mathematics and the making of brandy sort of defies understanding. Like I said, it just reminds me a lot of Andy Weir's protagonists, this idea that they are, you know, your average math or science teacher, but also are an absolute genius and can solve any engineering, math, science problem that comes across their table, even ones of alien origin, in an instant, seemingly magically, because they're just that good. And it is a little bit hard to suspend your disbelief for, and does become eye-rolly at times. And I definitely had those moments reading this where the whole conceit is that he is creating all this technology many centuries early, both to enrich himself, but also to attempt to do what he feels to be the most moral or best for him option, which is to stop Rome from falling, because he believes that if the Empire of Rome falls, his life will be worse, and he's stuck. So he would rather stop the Goths, keep the Romans in power, and live a cushier life, again, of wealth, because he's invented things like the printing press and the telegraph way before their time. And yeah, a little bit hard to suspend your disbelief for that he could remember the details of how so many of these different technologies worked enough to get them made, especially in a time where a lot of the components didn't even exist, and they kind of addressed that in the novel. It was a bit silly at times. I also felt like I just needed a moment where he was a little bit more shocked and taken aback by being sent back in time. He barely reacted. He very quickly accepted it, and then he, not even for a moment, thought about trying to get back. He just thought, okay, well, I'm here now. Great, let me set up my life. And that was it. There were no, reckonings. There was no emotional reaction. There was no, holy shit, I need to figure out how to get back. What am I going to do? Or even just a denial phase where he didn't believe he was really back in time. He just accepted it all, took it in stride in a way that feels very unrealistic for a human being. To be honest, but fine. And then the last piece for me, I do think that this was a great opportunity to dive a little bit deeper into the reasons why this Gothic war between the Goths and the Romans happened, what those tensions were, the political, social situation of the time, the inequalities in Roman society at the time, and the Goths who were refugees in Rome who were not given the same rights as Roman citizens, and the reasons why they might have been disgruntled by that fact. There's a lot of reasons why this war happened in real history, and I'm certainly not an expert, although reading this, one of the positives of reading this, I would say, is that it made me interested in that point in history, which I didn't really know anything about. I studied ancient Rome a little bit in my ancient history, ancient civilizations class in high school, but we didn't get all the way to the end, other than maybe a footnote or a mention of when Rome fell. We didn't really explore all the reasons behind it happening. And this book didn't either. Again, it's very short. So maybe I'm asking too much of a pulpy sci-fi novella from the 1940s. But it could have been a really cool opportunity to examine that more because he does get to know people on both sides. He is living amongst them and he's living in that time. And especially as an archaeologist, you'd think that he would be giddy by not only all of the ancient artifacts that he's interacting with on a day-to-day basis, just as day-to-day objects, but also all the historic figures, all the big players in history that he's meeting and interacting with. He interacts with kings and generals, and he mostly seems annoyed that he has to get involved at all and not excited about getting to meet these people and interact with them, which is kind of hard for me to understand because I am not an archaeologist nor a historian and have not spent a lot of time thinking about ancient Rome, but I would be honestly super giddy and excited if I were there back in time interacting with people and seeing how life was at the time. I mean, I would also be terrified because I wouldn't want to exist as a woman in any ancient time, and also not right before a huge bloody war and the fall of an empire. I get it. I get why he was afraid. And as a woman, there are extra layers there, but I would still be fascinated because it would be so cool. And he didn't really seem excited, which was confusing to me. Just some missed opportunities, I guess, and very little to no thematic content. There was a little bit of an attempt at engaging with the morality of interfering in history, but I feel like the book kind of absolved itself from examining the ethics of the situation by introducing the idea of these layered dimensions, and Padway fully believing that idea to the point where he's not worried about what impact his choices will make because he feels like he's made his own little pocket dimension where, this is not going to impact the real timeline. So I just think there could have been more in those areas. I would have loved a little bit more. I think the idea is interesting, but it didn't really do as much with it as I wanted. Again, it really does remind me of Andy Weir, to be honest. Just this idea that he keeps coming across not even problems that he has to solve, but he decides, actually, I need this technology that doesn't exist yet for my own needs. So I need to figure out how to manufacture it. I'm going to invent it, and manufacture it and run whatever thing it is, get people to run it for me so that I can not only have money to live, but also because I need a telegraph for, this reason. And I need the printing press because I need to do this. And whatever it is, like he's just running into an issue for himself and then solving it by inventing things centuries early over and over and over again, which is fine, I guess. But as I've talked about in reviewing Andy Weir's books, I do find it a little repetitive and a little lacking in depth and substance, and is just not as much my cup of tea in terms of the method or structure of storytelling. I guess I prefer a more thematic or character-driven story arc. And it feels less like a story with a beginning, middle, and end, and more like a series of vignettes, little adventures, little projects that are happening, which is less engaging to me personally. So those are kind of most of my thoughts. I also found his treatment of women pretty annoying, but again, it's from the 40s, so I don't know what I expected. It wasn't as bad as it could have been, to be fair, but definitely not my favorite. But the way that part of the story wrapped up at the end, I actually found quite satisfying and kind of mollified me on that point, I would say. So I'm not really knocking it for that. I think it could have been way more misogynistic. Considering it was written in the 40s, our main character is from the 40s, and then it's set in ancient Rome, could have been way worse than it was. So honestly, not too bad. And what else can I say? I'll share some spoilers in the spoiler section for those who are interested. Again, probably most of you aren't going to read this, so maybe a lot of you will watch the spoiler section that normally wouldn't because you're not going to get your hands on this. I would say, before I go into the spoilers, I'm landing at 3 stars. I think this was good. It was entertaining. It was a diversion. I enjoyed it for what it was, but it definitely didn't go as deep into all the aspects I mentioned as I personally would have liked, and there were some missed opportunities, I think. So 3 stars, I think, is a fair rating for this. It was good, but it was just good, And I would not personally say that it is worth going to great lengths to find a copy to read it. If it really sounds up your alley, then go for it. Try to find a copy if you're able to, and I hope you enjoy it. But I'm not sure I would say it's worth scouring the internet or used bookstores to find a copy. It's good, but it's just that. And there are lots of amazing sci-fi stories you can read that are still in print. So that's it for non-spoiler thoughts. I will do a little brief spoiler section just to let you know how things wrap up and my thoughts on the end. If you're curious, and then that'll be it. So spoilers for Lest Darkness Fall, starting now. Spoilers. So as I was saying, the misogyny in this could have been worse, but I did find the way Padway was interacting with women quite frustrating. He sleeps with his maid and then throws her out, and then he gets a crush on a man he meets at the library's daughter. Sort of unclear how old she is, but that is more chaste. I think they kiss once briefly. Then he catches the eye of a Gothic princess, and he's really intrigued as well for a short time, but then turns out she's too bloodthirsty or dominant for him, and he gets cold feet. So he tricks her into falling in love with one of his generals, and then lets them think that they've done him wrong by falling in love and going off together so that he can basically request favors from them for the rest of time if he needs them. But then he goes back thinking that that daughter of the man he met at the library would be the perfect person to end up with, and he's just fantasizing about her and thinks that, you know, they're going to settle down somewhere and just have a lovely, quiet life. And it turns out that she's pissed because he freed all the serfs as part of his political plans to try to stop the fall of the Roman Empire. And they, after being freed, burned down her childhood home with all of her sentiment belongings in it, and she is pissed and basically tells him, I better never see you again, otherwise you're gonna get it. And so he has to ride off alone into the sunset, and I found that quite satisfying, to be honest, for him to just be alone. I'm glad that he didn't end up with a harem or something. At one point I was getting worried, so I appreciated that. It made it a little bit easier to swallow his outdated perspective on women throughout. It also was, like I said, you know, so much of this book is suspending disbelief that he remembers how so many, knows in the first place, but also remembers in enough detail to recreate how so many of these different technologies work. But also he becomes a politician, basically the lead general. He is the puppet behind multiple kings, emperors. He remembers very specific details of events at this time, both specifically when they happen, but between who and where. He becomes an amazing fighter and is able to defeat, you know, assassins and trained warriors in battle. He leads armies into battle. Such a great strategist that he's able to, again, defeat lifelong generals. And it's just a little bit, again, it's a little bit hard to believe, you know? He's a very important man and he's very smart and good for him, I guess. But I did find it a little bit frustrating. But to spoil it, he does prevent the Goths from defeating the Romans and prevents Rome from falling, at least in the meantime. But as I mentioned in my non-spoiler review, this book doesn't really address any of the larger issues and the reasons why Rome was destined to fall based on, you know, all the inequality in their society and the angers and frustrations and oppression and wealth inequality and slavery and serfdom and so many other factors that this book doesn't address any of those, and also doesn't address the fact that he has not solved any of these issues at the root. He did free all the serfs, but he did so in a very abrupt way that is not necessarily going to turn out very well for everyone involved, depending on how they react to the situation. And, you know, it's hard not to think that things will just fall apart at some point in the future, just maybe not the way that they happened in our history. But anyway, I think that's all I have to say, spoiler-wise. You know, it's a very short book, so the fact that I've even talked about it as long as I have is honestly kind of impressive or worrying, depending on your perspective. But that's Lest Darkness Fall. That's it for spoilers. And those are all my thoughts on the 2 books that I read in August. Like I said, planned originally on reading 4 and we only got 2, but loved The Marrow Thieves, 5 stars, highly recommend. Please go read that book. Lest Darkness Fall, less of a favorite, but still enjoyable, entertaining. I don't regret reading it, even if it did take me 3 weeks. It was still good. So that is it for this video. That's month 2 of my Read It or Unhaul It challenge. Things went a little off the rails this month, but I still feel good about this challenge. I'm still enjoying it. And I have already spun the wheel for my next pick. So I guess I'll give you a little bit of a sneak peek for what's coming next month and maybe entice you to follow me on either Instagram or TikTok or both if you want, so that you can follow along week by week to get early thoughts. But The wheel landed on The Master and Margarita, which I feel like I'm going to say this about all the books, I guess, because they're all books I own. So obviously I've been wanting to read them, but some of them have been on my shelves for longer than others. And this one's been there for a while. And also even before I bought a copy was on my TBR. So I am very excited to read this. I've heard great things about this book. Certainly longer than our last pick. This is what, 400-ish pages? I guess those are the notes or commentary. So, 370-ish. Yeah, that's not as long as I thought. It feels heavier than that, but I'm excited to read this one. I've heard good things. So this will be the first read for September's. So watch out for the next reading vlog coming at the end of September, or I guess the beginning of October by the time I edit it. But again, if you follow me on Instagram and or TikTok, you will see my review of this much sooner. Actually, by the time this video comes out, you might already be able to hear my review because I think that this video is coming out at least a week from today. So anyways, future me will let you know basically right away what I thought of this if you go follow me on those platforms. If you don't have Instagram or TikTok, I don't think you need an account to watch an individual TikTok or Instagram reel. So you can also become a patron, and I have a channel specifically for this challenge, both for me to share my progress, but also for any of my patrons who want to join me on the challenge. So if you want to join us, feel free. You can get access to the Discord at the lowest tier level. So that's just $1 per month if you're interested and you're not on social media. Some people mentioned that in the last video, but I'm excited to read this next month. Fingers crossed, knock on wood, that September will be less of an overwhelming, stressful month for me, and I'll get through 4 books in the month. That's what I would really love. But anyways, thank you for being here. Thank you for being as enthusiastic and excited about this challenge as I have been. The response has honestly been a little bit overwhelming in the best way possible, so thank you. I am excited and enjoying it too, so yay. If you are doing a similar challenge, whether inspired by me or not, let me know how it's going in the comments. I'd love to know how you're doing and what your rules are, what books you've read so far, what's your progress stats-wise, where did you start, how many books on your TBR, and how many do you have now, and also best book you've read for your challenge so far, worst book. Let me know. Share how it's going if you're also doing the challenge. These are my stats so far in the challenge as a little bit of a wrap-up or summary now that we're at the end of month 2, and I'm looking forward to next month and our next reads. But anyway, that's it for me. I'm gonna go. I've been rambling for so long. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to head to Squarespace for your free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/plantbasedbride and use code plantbasedbride for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. You can also use this QR code. And with that, I'm gonna get going. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.